We are talking about recording live in a room and how to isolate the individual elements and instruments better, but also about how you can actually embrace the room sound and the fact that you're recording live. So, yeah, let's discuss. This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast. I am your host, Benedict Hein, and I'm here with my friend and co-host, Malcolm Owen Flood. How are you, Malcolm?
Hello, I'm great. Thank you very much. Having a fantastic Monday. How are you doing?
Sorry for that, but after the conversation we just had, starting with I'm having a fantastic Monday, it's just awesome. No need to get into details here, but that just made me laugh. Yeah, we're always having a perfect Monday.
No Monday has ever been tough.
Yeah, exactly.
Not for us at the Self-Recording Band. We eat Mondays for breakfast.
Exactly. That's how we do it. So but how are you actually, or how was the weekend? What did you do? Because I've seen some pretty amazing pictures.
Oh, great, man. Yeah. So I was at this studio called Barnhouse Sound in Qualicum Beach on Vancouver Island here. It is one of the most beautiful studios I've ever witnessed, both in photos and now in person. It is crazy, crazy beautiful. Sounds amazing. It sounds like this big cathedral pretty much. It's like a big timber frame, 3-story tall vaulted ceiling situation with like beautiful glass all over the place, like to let sunlight in. Check it out on Instagram. Justin, the owner, is just a great dude that helped us out a lot getting set up and stuff as well, which was really appreciated. And I was in there with a listener of the podcast, Michael Wilford. I said his name weird. Sorry, buddy. And it was, we had a blast. It was just like a live-in studio situation too. So there's accommodations there. There's a hot tub, pool table, the whole works. It was fantastic. Awesome. Great weekend. But now I'm tired because we worked our butts off.
Yeah, exactly. I'm pretty sure. And actually, that was the second session in a row, right? Before that, you did the vocalist thing that we've been talking about. So, yeah.
It's been busy few weeks hanging out with the musician folk, but it's been great. Really great. So I'm super stoked on the sounds.
Totally. I have one particular question, then we move on to today's episode, but this is also relevant. I saw the pictures, and there was like, I'm not sure if I remember correctly, but did you use a pair of Coles as overheads on those drums?
I did,
like ribbon mics? Okay, cool. Because I was interested in two things. Because first of all, I thought that probably when the ceiling is that high and the room is that great sounding, you probably get these overheads probably sound almost like room mics, and you get a lot of ambience in them, which can be great. So I bet that was probably the intention.
Yeah, so we can talk about that a little bit. Ribbon mics, almost as a rule, are figure 8 patterns, right? So they hear behind them as well as in front of them. And that was exactly, as you intended, or as I intended, I guess, but as you suspected, that we got some room ambience in our overheads that sounded just like crazy awesome. It was sweet. Also happens to be kind of do you know Shaky Graves, the artist?
No.
Okay. Well, anyways, the drum part is more of a riff than a drum part, than like a beat. And there wasn't a lot of cymbal usage. It's like the ride gets hit every once in a while, and the hi-hat is kind of like another drum rather than like a constant. So that let me just be like, okay, well, we're going to get kind of a figure 8 thing going on. Kind of a figure 8. It wasn't really. But anyways, tight, phase coherent, fat sounding drums. And then I actually used a stereo ribbon pair on the room mic as well. So it's like very bombastic, roomy sounding drums. It was awesome.
Awesome. And yeah, the second part of the question, you almost answered that by sort of, because I was wondering about the placement, because it didn't look like a proper quote unquote bloom line or anything like that, but like not a space pair either, something in between, I think.
My thought was that they were pointed at what I wanted them to be pointed at, and close enough that the phase would be pretty darn good.
Okay,
and
good.
It was.
Good. Awesome. Yeah, that's what I was, because sometimes that's the right thing to do. I just wanted to mention that because it's a good example of that there are no hard rules, and just because there are like quote unquote proper stereo miking techniques, that doesn't mean you have to use them all the time. You can break the rules, and
Yeah. And it worked great. Worth noting as well that those mics, these big Coles, if you ever get a chance to use them, my favorite mics, hands down. I love them so much now. They are essentially ginormous magnets, and they'll literally push the other one around. Like, so if you're trying to put them in a way that they don't want to go, like your mic stand's just going to fly away from you as you push it closer. So it's a little frustrating.
Yeah, can confirm.
Or smash together. It goes either way.
Yeah, exactly.
Like magnets do.
Cool. Yeah, but that just, when you look at a picture and you can almost like hear how good it sounds just by looking at it, that's one of those pictures.
Yeah,
so.
Totally. Yeah. Go ahead to my Instagram, folks. I'll post something.
Exactly. Yeah, do that. Cool. Talking about Instagram, that's a pretty good segue into something I wanted to share with you, because I started doing something today. So by the time this episode airs, it's probably like 8 or 9 days ago. And what I want to do is I thought of ways that I can provide more insights and advice and value and quick tips and for the community and for listeners. And I thought about it and how can I do that without it taking up a lot of time, so that I can still do the podcast and work on records and all that. So, but I still wanted it to be valuable, of course. And I also wanted something that got me thinking and that makes me reflect on projects that I'm working on and think about things a little deeper. So anyway, I came up with the idea that I would just do very short daily blog posts. So not like long form blog posts, but could be a couple of sentences, could be just a small little like a tweet or anything, sometimes a little longer, I don't know. But what I do now is I make a blog post on the website every single day on some topic. So when I work on a session, on a record, or when we talk about something and something sticks out to me, I make a note, write it down, and then I make a short post about it the next day. I just reflect on it, I think about it a little more, and then whatever comes to mind, what I think might be a useful lesson that I've learned or a problem that I had to solve or anything like that, I'm going to share that immediately with you, because I think that's one of the best ways to teach is actually share what you learned yourself the second before, or I just want to share all the little tiny lessons that come or problems that come up every day. And the way I do that is I make a blog post on my website. So if you go to theselfrecordingband.com/blog, there are going to be long form blog posts that I've written a while ago. But now there is also going to be the daily blog category with these short posts. And I'm also going to put them in my Instagram story. So if you follow me at Benedictine, just one word, at Benedictine, on Instagram, you'll see those in my story every morning, my time. So that's just something I want to share with you. And let me know if you find that helpful, if you find that interesting. Part of it is also doing it for myself, I guess, because it just makes me think about things. And sharing things publicly is always a good exercise. And so, anyway, let me know if you like that. I'll do that from now on. And cool. That's something I'm really excited about. And go to Malcolm's Instagram, look at those beautiful pictures, and then go to my Instagram and check out the daily posts there, stories.
Yeah, mine's for an ego fix. Benny's is for learning something.
I think there's value in both. So anyway, thank you for that. And then last thing before we finally get to today's episode is I want to ask you once again, please, to share the podcast with your friends, and also please leave reviews on whatever app you're listening to this podcast. If you're on Apple Podcasts, that's awesome. If you are on whatever app you're using, if they have a review feature, or some rating feature, whatever, please give us 5 stars and write a couple of sentences. It really means a lot to us, and it really helps us reach more people and make more recordings sound better. And please do that. And every once in a while, we might even shout out a couple of those people who do it. So this week, for example, Malcolm shared with me a pretty amazing review that we got. I haven't even noticed, but I want to read it because it's awesome. It's from Brad Attic, and he gave us 5 stars, and he says, Malcolm is an absolute genius. I have to agree.
Wow, what a smart man. I already like him.
These podcasts are so helpful to beginners starting out recording instruments, understanding software, gear explanation, tips, and so much more. The amount of knowledge in these podcasts is ridiculous. If I could, I'd give this a 10 out of 5. Thank you so much, Brett. This just made my day. And we might just
Awesome.
do a couple of shout outs that way if you review us.
First off, Brett is obviously one of the most intelligent, talented people in the world after reading that comment. No, thanks,
100%
Brett.
agreed.
Yeah. No doubt in my mind, he's right about everything he writes. I want to segue that we've mentioned this band, Wet Future, a few times on the podcast, and a band I've been mixing for, and he is their drummer. So there's some cool him learning. I'm getting the mixed tracks he's recording. It's all this like, hey, what we're doing is actually working. It's awesome. It's great.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
It's the best.
And as far as sharing the podcast with other people and giving us reviews and stuff, that's also going to help us get other cool guests on and stuff like that. Like the growth we experience helps us secure even better lessons for you in the future. So there is some benefit for you actually doing that, and we really appreciate it.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Better guests, and also the more people listen, the more people write reviews, the more people react to our shows, the more emails we get and all of that, the better we understand what you really want to hear, what would really be helpful for you. So the better we can make these episodes and come up with topics for you. So it all works together. So yeah, share these episodes, help us grow, and please leave reviews. Thank you so much.
Sure thing. Why did I say sure thing? Like I'm gonna do it.
Yeah,
no problem, man. I'll leave a review. Malcolm is the best.
Yeah.
I'll just write Brett Attick's review again.
I'm starting to question whether Monday is the best day to do a podcast recording.
I didn't have enough coffee. Sorry.
No problem at all. So let's move on to today's episode. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the drum overheads. At least this will be part of this episode as well, because we are talking about recording live in a room, and we're talking about how to reduce bleed and how to isolate the individual elements and instruments better, but also about how you can actually embrace the room sound and the fact that you're recording live. So, yeah, let's discuss. It's a question that we get a lot. That's just one thing I wanted to say, and that brings me back to like the whole we react to your requests sort of thing, because a lot of people are asking this. It seems like a lot of people are recording live, or at least do demos and pre-pro live, and they're struggling to get a clear recording with good separation between the instruments and all of that. So we try to answer this for you now and give you a little some insights on how we would approach such a situation. What are your first thoughts on this, Malcolm?
First, I actually want to talk about why you might be recording live, to give some context to the situation. Because I know some people who have never done it, and then I know some people that are just terrified of overdubbing and not doing it live. So we're talking about live in the sense of maybe you're trying to do like off-the-floor demos or pre-production in your jam space. But we're also talking about live if that's how you want your album to sound, if you want it to be a live off-the-floor album. Or maybe it's a live off-the-floor video of you playing a song that's been recorded for the album, but you're doing like a video of it or just an alternate version. There's all these different situations where live comes up, and learning how to do that effectively is totally helpful. I'd also argue that learning how to do this is going to teach you things that will help you with live performances in the future.
Yes, I totally
agree. To some
agree.
extent.
Yeah.
You don't have as much freedom, but it could help.
Absolutely. I think that recording in general is helping you with your live performances. It's like
yes.
I think recording a record is almost like a boot camp for every band. Like bands are so much better after recording a record than they were before. Every time.
Yeah. Every single time. No matter how good you are.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I totally agree. These are basically the scenarios. So it's important to talk about the why in this case, because you might have to make the decision whether you want things very isolated and separate, or whether you want the glue factor of like everything bleeding into everything.
Mm-hmm.
You need to decide what is more important to you. Do you want to have very good separation because you want to analyze things, but the tones are not really as important, or the final sound of it? All these things, like there are a couple of decisions to be made here. And it's always going to be some sort of trade-off in a live situation, I feel. It's a trade-off with when it comes to monitoring, like how much do you want to hear from the room? How much do you want to hear in your headphones? It's going to be a trade-off there. It's going to be a trade-off like when you think about, do you want to use like a real amp? If so, how loud can you crank it? Is it going to sound worse because it has to be really quiet? Or do you need to use a load box or amp sims and avoid the amp at all? Like all these things, it's one big trade-off, I think, and a lot of questions that you need to answer. But there are some things that I think help a lot and that get you like 80% there. And it's, as always, there are a few things, if you do those, that's probably do the trick. That will probably do the trick, and everything else is like little improvements if you want to go further.
Right. Yeah. So first off, we got to talk about positioning, which is going to be like if we're 80-20 in it, that's the 80% that matters, or no, 20% that does 80% of the work.
Exactly.
I know what I'm talking about, right? Another Monday strikes again. And for people listening, yes, we record on Mondays, even though you're getting it on a Wednesday.
Exactly. Yeah. So positioning, and we mean positioning of instruments or amps in the room, but also mic positioning, and like positioning of whatever you use to isolate stuff, like acoustic absorbers, gobos, stuff like that. So positioning stuff in the room.
Yeah.
And that is really the 80 here, to me at least. And it starts with how you set up the band, I feel like. So I'm curious to hear if you, before I tell people what I think about this, do you have any approach to this? Like, do you, let's say you record a real record, not a demo, but like the real record live. Would you set everything up as like if it was a stage or anything like that? Or do you approach it completely different?
I'd approach it completely different. I'll be honest here. All of the times I've had to do this have been in commercial recording studios. So I've had a lot of power in that. I'm like, okay, the amp's just going to go in this other room. No problem. We got a snake that runs in there, and oh yeah, these doors, there's 2 doors on this wall. So we'll just like, isolation has been pretty easy for me. But that said, there have been times where we've left them in the same room and had to figure that out. And I did not do the stage setup, quote unquote stage setup, where everything is, along the same wall, pointing the same direction. I took into account I think there's a few things to take into account: where your players are and then where your instrument sources are. There's a lot of communication that goes into a live performance. So being able to have everybody looking at each other like bands often do naturally in a jam space, right? A lot of bands don't set up like they're on a stage, which is a whole thing that needs to be practiced, but that's another conversation. Normally it's a circle, right? So I generally try and get the band set up like that. And then we have to figure out the instruments, I think, right?
Yeah.
So first up would be drums. And drums, I usually just decide on where I think the drums will sound best in the room. And then I'm going to start building around that. Do you do the same?
Sort of, yeah. I start with the question of like, what's the image going to be, like the stereo image? So is it important? Like, do we have like multiple sources in the room that are going to bleed into each other and that are actually going to be loud in the room? Or are we going to do all DI and stuff? Because then it doesn't matter as much. So if we do all DIs, and if we, let's say, overdub the vocals, which I most of the time would recommend, then I would absolutely go and choose the best spot for the drums and then put the people wherever and just grab the eyes. If I'm dealing with real amps and it's going to be loud in the room, then there's going to be another trade-off, I guess, because then I will probably choose a spot for the drums close to the shorter wall of the room. If it's a standard like rectangular room, I would put the drums in the middle of the shorter wall of the room. Then I would put the bass, if there's a bass amp, close to the drums, because those are like the kick drum and the bass are probably going to be in the middle. So I want them close together if I put a pair of room mics in the room. Then I would, on the longer walls, like left and like if you look from the drummer's perspective, if you look into the room, on the left and right wall, somewhere in the middle, I would put the 2 guitar amps facing to like the center, facing each other, basically, pointing to the center of the room, sort of.
Yep.
And I would put the guitar players on the opposite sides of their amps, actually. So not in front of their own amp, but in front of the other amp, because oftentimes you can hear your own amp better at a little distance, right. Versus standing right in front of it. So that's a little trick that I use. And like you can just look for a good spot where both guitarists can hear both guitars in the way they want them to hear. They want to hear them. So I would do that. bass next to the drums, and then I would put the vocal, if there are vocals in the room also, I would put them as far away from the drums as possible on the other short wall.
Yeah.
The vocal is looking into the room so everyone can see each other, and the vocal is like with the back to the wall, the microphone pointing away from the drums, avoiding cymbal bleed in the vocal mic at all cost. And that's probably one of the rare situations where I also would use, or try it at least, to use some of those like reflection mic screens that I typically don't like. But in this situation, I would probably use it to try and get rid of even more cymbal bleed and bleed it overall. So in that way, like everyone can see each other. And if I throw now a pair of room mics in the room, maybe somewhere close to where the vocal mic is, I can have a stereo image with one guitar left, one guitar right, bass and drums in the middle, sort of. Vocals won't really matter because they will be quiet in the room, probably. And then I would probably start dialing in volumes, listening to those room mics, and I would make sure probably that I get a good balance in the room, if that's something I want. If I want the glue.
I totally think you're right. The main thing you have to consider is that stereo picture. So if your room mics don't match what you want to hear, you're kind of going to be battling that for the rest of the time. On the other hand, not really on the other hand, but in conjunction with that, I guess, you can also try and utilize like the pattern, the pickup pattern of your room mics to reject where you place your amps. So if it's cardioid, you can get your amp kind of behind the room mics in those nulls and get some more isolation that way. But again, if you're not careful, you're gonna like still hear some and maybe in the wrong mic. You do have to really listen to anything that's meant to like pick up what the room actually sounds like with all of you playing. It has to match what you want. You can't really stress that enough. I've gotten to sit in, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I've gotten to sit in on some like symphony recordings in big theaters and stuff like that. And 85% of those recordings are two mics hung off the rafters above the crowd's head, spaced out there, or sometimes a little closer to the stage. But it's like almost always all of it is like, I can't even stress how much all of it, I mean, is two mics in just getting the whole picture. Then sometimes there's spot mics on the piano or something, but it's almost all done with two mics. And it's because they placed them and arranged the band on the stage. There's a reason the band is laid out as they're laid out on the stage in those situations. So that is what you have to do in this situation too.
Totally agreed. And you can do the live setup, by the way. There's a famous producer. His name is Vance Powell. I don't know if you know him.
Yes.
And he does, from what I know and from videos that I've watched of him, like he likes the live setup thing. And he also relies heavily on a pair of room mics that captures like the band coming off the stage, basically. And he likes the fact that everything's lined up perfectly, and it gives him a feeling of like, like, I don't know if it's phase but it's coming from the same direction, lined up perfectly. It has the energy and the stereo image that you get from a band. So you can totally do the live setup, but you need a room that allows you to do that, a big enough room, because like lining up everything next to each other on one wall requires a pretty long room, and also you want to have some space in the other direction as well to get as far away with the room mics as you need to get a cool image here. And so it's not possible in most small rehearsal rooms, I think. But
no,
if you can do it, that's you can do what Malcolm just described as well, of course.
But kind of regardless, those room mics, if they don't sound like the stereo image that you have in your head for your recording, it's not even worth putting them up.
Yeah.
It's like it gets done wrong so enough that it's worth mentioning. It's like, just don't use those channels for something else if you're not getting what you want from the room mics.
I absolutely agree. And sometimes you don't want them at all. Sometimes you want the amps really quiet because you don't want them in the drum overheads or whatever, and you wouldn't get a good room glue or room image anyways, or just sometimes it just doesn't make sense in that situation. So only use them if you really want that sound of one pair of mics in the room, and also if what you're hearing there is usable and actually matches the sound in your head totally. And often that's not the case. I agree.
Yeah.
So when it comes to positioning, the next thing is like the clever use of isolation tools, I'd say, or things you can build yourself or buy or whatever. So I would, in the example that I just mentioned, and also in the live setup example, I would probably always try to use gobos between the guitar amps and the drums. So when you look again from the drummer's perspective into the room, you wouldn't see the guitar amps because there would be gobos, sort of hiding them from the drums.
Yeah, we're talking about shields.
Yeah, exactly.
Essentially, if you're not familiar with gobos, we're putting something in the way. Ideally, something with some acoustic treatment, but whatever. There's I saw photos of Steve Earle. You know that guy?
Yeah.
Copperhead Road. It's like the session of that, and they recorded some studio in Ireland, and it's like just concrete walls are built into the room. Then that was their gobos, just concrete walls. It's like, wow, things have changed.
Yeah. I haven't seen that. Yeah.
Too funny.
I mean, it's probably the best gobo of all. Like if
yeah, a little reflective, but very effective.
They didn't even treat the surface like.
No, it's like just concrete.
Oh, okay. Then, yeah. I mean, I was thinking like a concrete core and then treated with something. That would be the perfect gobo, actually. But
no, there was back in those days. I think there was confusion between soundproofing and sound treatment.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I would just use whatever. Like, if you can, you can of course build absorbers, like the way that Jesko, that we had, the guest that we had on our podcast, and our friend and acoustics expert Jesko Lohan teaches all the time, is like you build a wooden frame and you put fiber, some sort of like rock wool, fiberglass, whatever you use inside that. There's different. I say whatever you want to use because there's different stuff in different countries that's got different names, so I can't recommend one product. I just know for Germany, it's like rock wool. Sono-Rock is one thing that works, but there's different like sort of rock wool available. And you can put that inside that wooden frame and then cover it with fabric. And that's a gobo. That's an absorber. And you can put that on the wall, or you can use it as a gobo and just put it somewhere in the room. Or if you don't want to build something like that, you can just use a mattress or whatever for that, like for getting some isolation from the amps. It will probably work.
Yeah. You've probably seen it live with people using, like, venues have plexi shields for amps or drums sometimes. Those work in a pinch as well. Be careful with what they do to the sound as well. They're always too close to things.
Yeah.
But essentially it can be worth blocking the line of sight, essentially.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and then try whatever you can to shield things from other things. And then one neat little trick that I like to use, that goes back to using the polar patterns of the mics that you touched on, Malcolm. I like to use, and also full circle here to the beginning, I like to use ribbon mics as overheads in those situations because of the figure of eight pattern. Because what that does is, like, figure of eight mics have the null on the side. And it's actually, they are rejecting a lot. They have better rejection than cardioids on the back, actually. And if you put two ribbon mics on the drums as overheads, and the side of them is pointing into the room where the guitar amps are, you get pretty good sounding drums with pretty low volume, like bleed volume. It's incredible, actually, how much you can reject with those. I have a pretty small live room. And I've done a bunch of live recordings in there with pretty loud amps, and every single time I couldn't believe how quiet the amps were in the overheads, if positioned correctly. And it only works with the figure of eights because they pick up from the bottom and the top, but the sides have a really, really good rejection.
Yeah, smart mic choice there for sure. I like that a lot. You'd be surprised at how, again, going back to room mics especially, how loud guitar strings and vocals can be. At getting into room mics or even overheads or whatever. So positioning the player does actually matter. You might think it doesn't because you can't hear anything in the loud room, but those mics might be able to. So if you've got a guitarist, even if his amp is totally DI'd or something and he's strumming hard beside the room mic, you're going to hear that like ticking potentially, and that's not very musical sounding, right? Nobody wants to hear an electric guitar unplugged in the recording.
Oh yeah, totally. I didn't even think about that, but you're totally right. Especially in a small room, you quickly get close to some mic, and then you hear the strumming, and totally.
We should talk about doing that, DIing or using amp sims and stuff like that.
Of course,
that is it'll be brief because it's so simple, but that's a great move. If you have a piece of gear that lets you because the player needs to monitor something at the same time. So you have to have a setup where they can not have an amp live in the room, but still hear an amp, right, to be able to play their parts. And there's lots of ways. Like my Kemper is one way. You can use some like the neural DSP stuff or amp sims if you have an interface set up to monitor it, I guess. Or there's even pedals that do a pretty good job of it now. Like the Strymon or Radium, I think, is one that is it's like an amp and a pedal with a direct out. So those are options, and obviously that's going to remove all bleed, which is pretty cool. Worth considering, right? Definitely worth considering, especially for bass, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, the best situation would be to get the vibe of people playing together without all the bleed would be to have all the eyes and then do vocal overdubs and basically just record the drums in the room.
Yeah.
And that way you can like totally focus on the drum sound. You can do whatever to make the drum sound as good as possible. And then you can just reamp the guitar performances and do vocal overdubs. And that way, I think you get the best of both worlds in a way. So
absolutely. Yeah, it literally is the best of both worlds. You get the fun of doing it live with the isolation of individually recorded tracks, essentially that part. And then if there's a mistake, you can fix it. It's not it hasn't bled into the room mics. And people don't account for that. It's like if one person screws up, it screws it for everyone if there's bleed, right?
Yes.
So it is really hard. People think it's faster, but it can be a lot slower if somebody's not up to the task to record live. And this really frees it up. And I've set up bands to do this, to like quotation mark track beds live, and then ended up only keeping the drums and just redoing everything else. Been like, okay, that worked, but the rest could be better. So we're just going to start. We've got our foundation of drums now, so we'll just pick it up from there, overdub to them, kind of thing. It gives you, we're hoping to record everything live, but we don't have to, because it's not bleeding into everything. We have that flexibility. And again, isolation rooms, like if you can somehow run your amp to another room and it's not bleeding in too loudly, then you've got the same thing there. It doesn't have to be a DI. It just needs to be isolated.
Yeah. And what you just said there is also interesting to me because, again, that brings us back to the question of why you want to make that live recording in the first place. And part of the reason, or oftentimes the biggest reason, is that you want to get the feeling of a band playing together, like people interacting with each other and the groove and the feeling that results from that. And I think even if you just end up keeping the drums, you still capture that feeling that way because the drums, the groove and everything has that vibe. And then if you overdub to it, you just have to make sure it can be a little tricky to do that again and like really nail the performance a second time. But at least you have that groove that I think the basic energy is captured in those drum takes. So the purpose is still like there, and it just works. Also,
yeah, it definitely.
Yeah. Go ahead.
The reason I normally do this is actually not because of the live setup, because I never really do find that I miss vibe from going overdubs. I'm like, all my favorite records recorded overdub. It doesn't seem to be a problem for them.
No.
It just takes a good drummer, right? But there definitely is a difference. But the main reason I actually do it is when the band hasn't done enough pre-pro. Yes. And I know that we're going to need to make changes to the song and arrangement on the fly. And we don't want just to be doing that based on drums. We want the whole band to be able to react and try things out rapidly. Be like, okay, what if you guys build into the chorus rather than just like going from, low level to high level kind of thing, like have a dynamic build, and we can try it on the spot with everybody modifying their part at the same time. Communication is just so quick in that case. And there's nothing left to the imagination anymore. So it's normally production. We're still doing production choice decisions at that stage, and that's why it's so nice.
Absolutely, and I would even recommend you do maybe if you can at all, like do a quick setup with, like, let's say you plan on overdubbing everything, but maybe you can set up like 2 or 3 DIs and do one pass of each song all together, even if you just plan to record drums, just to make sure that it really, like, maybe you want to do a tempo change somewhere and you're not really sure. Maybe like even if you have done pre-pro, maybe you haven't thought about what the exact, like you should have, but maybe you haven't thought about like tempo changes, or maybe one part still feels a little weird and you don't know why. And then you can't just do one pass, compare it to your demos, compare how it feels. If you find yourself, or if you play a song 5 times and every single time one part is a little slower than what you have in your pre-pro, maybe it's a good idea to make that part a little slower. You can just do a last check and make sure that what you capture is actually the way that the song should feel.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, absolutely agreed. Now, but when you do that, when you record live with only the eyes, I think the monitoring becomes incredibly important because people are used to hearing their amps in the room, and they're like, if you only have your headphones now, but the loud drums that are probably bleeding into those headphones, you got to make sure it still feels good for the player. So closed back headphones and proper headphone amps that can really drive those headphones and give you the volume that you need are absolutely critical here. You need to be careful, though. You don't want to damage your hearing, of course, but you need something powerful enough that it's fun to play to and that you actually hear what you're playing. And you need also as much isolation as possible. That is even more important than sound, I think.
Yeah. If you're recording live, you have to be able to play well together live. And if you can't hear each other, it's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
Nobody can play a good show if they can't hear themselves. We've all been in that situation where the stage sound is just a disaster, and it's always a terrible experience.
Yes. So yeah, really pay attention to buy a 4-channel or a bunch of those if you need more, a cheap but good headphone amplifier that can really drive a couple of headphones, and then use isolation closed back headphones that don't have to be super expensive, but just something that gives you the isolation and sounds somewhat decent and pleasant. And that is, I think, the most important investment almost if you want to do it that way. Now I'm going to say something controversial, especially for guitar players, people. If you play guitar and listen to this podcast, you might agree with or hate the following statement, and that is, and I'm curious to hear what you say about that, Malcolm. Because I say that amp volume, even with tube amps, doesn't matter nearly as much as people think it does. So to me, I would always, the priority would always be on separation and monitoring and mic position to get the tone and all of that versus cranking the power amp of the amp, because I think it only sounds good if it's cranked really loud, because I don't believe that to be true. I think there is something to be said about the different sounds you get out of a power amp depending on the volume, and that if you crank it, you get saturation and there's a sweet spot and all of that. I totally agree, but I don't agree that it matters so much that it's worth having the amp bleed into everything else and causing problems with the drums. And so I absolutely think that you can record a quiet tube amp. I've done it a bunch of times. It works. There's also ways you can do it with a cranked amp, like load boxes and stuff. But even without it, just turning the master volume down can absolutely sound good. Period.
Oh, yeah. 100% agree. I think when I'm recording the guitar by itself, I generally do turn it up quite a bit, but it's kind of because it's fun.
Yeah.
And you're making a decision by recording live that you were giving up that luxury pretty much, because you can't ruin the drum recording by blaring an amp at it, right? It's just, that's not a good decision. It's a waste of your time if you're going to do that. So yeah, you have to balance it out. On the other hand, it is totally a thing to be too quiet. If the cymbals are coming into your guitar mic louder than your guitar, you've got a problem. So there's you got to balance the signal to noise ratio essentially. And in this case, noise is literally other instruments. So figure that out.
Absolutely agree. There's a sweet spot here as well. But I'm glad you agree with the power amp discussion, because I just don't think it's true. In fact, I've gotten a bunch of recordings from people where I think they recorded too loud. I think a lot of people think a tube amp has to be loud, and they ignore how the cab reacts to the loud amp. You get compression from the speaker. Some mics just can't take that, the sound pressure.
The room can kind of get overloaded.
Exactly.
Sure.
So in some situations, it would actually sound better not to crank the amp. Other situations, you can absolutely do it. So there's no hard rule here. I just want to say, if you're worried about your tube amp not sounding good in a situation like that, forget about that. Just get a good signal to noise ratio, set the amp so that it sounds good, get a good mic position, isolate it as good as much as possible, and remember that it's always going to be a trade-off in a live situation. Something's got to give.
Definitely.
Cool.
Yeah, It's all about balance. Now, vocals. Quick
yeah.
conversation there.
Yes.
You should overdub them.
Period.
You should 100% overdub them. It's a disaster every time. But if you can't, it has to be live to video or something, a live stream kind of thing. Placement is everything. Use a dynamic microphone with some great rejection. You could probably get away with a figure eight in the right situation, right band. You could get away with a condenser in the right setup with the right band. But a dynamic's just going to take a lot of the headache out of it for you. Make sure the null of that mic is at the loudest things in the room. Hopefully, they're far away from everything. Really, your two tools are volume, or three tools are volume, placement of the polar pattern on your mic, and then also just distance. Distance makes a big difference. And then I guess isolation again. If you can get a gobo in front of the singer, hell yeah.
Agreed. 100% agreed. Yeah, and overdub again, just overdub if at all possible. It's not only because it's for so many reasons. Vocals are quiet compared to a loud drum kit in the room. Mm-hmm. The cymbals are
almost no matter how big the room is. It's just it's a quiet instrument.
Yeah, and then also you got to think about if you're recording DIs along with your amps, you can at least. No, if the amps are loud and the overhead's not at all, but there is a chance to edit guitars or edit drums in a way, depending on how good the isolation is. And if you use DIs, you're totally free to do that. But with vocals in the same room, it's very, very hard to do because the bleed will be loud in that microphone. And if you need to tune or time correct or anything, the vocals, you're going to have a hard time because it will sound weird with everything else. You're going to get phasey cymbals, you're going to get weird guitars, you're going to get tuning issues with the guitars. So you need to basically nail the performance or live with whatever mistakes are in there. And especially with vocals, I think it's just you sacrifice a lot here. If a vocal performance is lacking, it's just not good most of the time. So yeah, better have a really good singer to do that.
Agree. Yeah. A lot of DIY people are recording without compression and stuff like that either. So they're not really seeing the final product well on the way in, and they might be underestimating how bad the bleed problem in the vocal microphone is. Okay, it seems okay, but once you've crushed it and compressed it and added delay and reverb to it, right? So now you've got a repeat of all the noise in there as well that's been made louder. It really gets ugly quick. So overdubbing is good. A little industry secret for you. I bet most of the live videos you think you've watched are overdubbed vocals.
Yes.
Anything that's multi-camera, probably an overdubbed vocal.
Yeah. Yep.
If it wasn't a live stream, overdubbed vocal. There's definitely exceptions. I'm painting with a broad brush, but it's a pretty common little move.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the final thing I want to add is sometimes the right thing to do is just to embrace the bleed and the fact that it's live. And sometimes all of what we just said doesn't matter as much. And the right approach is set up a pair of room mics, set up the stuff in the room that you get a great image, balance out the volume, use that pair of room mics as the main pair of microphones, get it to sound as good as possible, and then add in whatever is lacking or missing with close mics. That can be an approach as well. Sometimes you just need to embrace it. Or sometimes if you have a mic in front of a kick drum that just gives you that awesome kick drum sound that you really want, and you need to put it at a distance from the kick drum, but that also means you get a lot of guitar amps in that mic, just embrace it. Just treat it as not only the kick out mic, but treat it as sort of a room mic or a kick and guitar mic or whatever. Just label it differently, embrace it, and run with it. That can totally work. It's the same thing. That mindset shift is often so helpful. It's the same thing as with if you're getting a lot of hi-hat bleed in a snare mic, for example, in a common scenario in a standard drum recording. Sometimes it helps to just think about it differently. And sometimes when people send me a snare recording with a really, really loud hi-hat in it, I just label it hat/snare or something.
Right.
And then my hat, I think differently about it. And then I treat it as a combination of a hi-hat and snare mic. And I just live with it if it sounds usable at all. Yeah. So sometimes that's just the right approach. Sometimes worrying about isolation is not the right thing to do. And you just got to live with the fact that everything bleeds into everything. And you should even try to make the bleed sound pleasant.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Embracing, I think that's actually a must in either way. There's going to be some bleed. So how can you make it useful and not not harmful. As long as the bleed sounds good, because remember, we're not really editing anymore. This is live. Not that you can't. There's tricky editing things you can do, but essentially, you're getting what you get. And so making that bleed help you is totally a great, useful concept to keep in mind. Advanced mode concept for you. You could use speakers, a PA system, to supplement certain things.
Oh, yeah.
So you can fight noise with noise. So maybe you want it to sound even more live, and you want that vocal coming out of speakers or something, so that the room mic is actually hearing a vocal. You can do stuff like that. You could reinforce the shells with the PA, or maybe the guitars, whatever. You can go down that road. Probably not in most cases, but it's possible.
Yes. Cool. Yeah, thank you for that. That's also a great idea. Yeah, as always, no hard rules. Be creative. Embrace the fact that you're recording live, and do whatever it takes to make it sound awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I think
All right.
we pretty much covered it.
Absolutely. All right. I have one question for you.
Yes.
What would you like if you had the choice? Right out, like off the top of your head, whatever situation comes to mind first, would you go direct boxes and like as isolated as possible, or amps and room?
I have to answer with it depends.
Yeah.
Like it's the worst answer, but it totally depends, and it depends. It depends mostly on the genre. Like if it's
It does.
Yeah, I mean, some like the genres where I would need absolute isolation are probably ones that I wouldn't record live anyways.
Right.
That's the one thing. But if I have to record live or want to record live, then it still depends on the genre. The more technical it is, the faster it is, the tighter it has to be from like an editing or performance standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
The more isolation I need, and then I would go absolutely like DI, overdub vocals and everything. And the more open, sort of dirty, and if you want like organic or whatever you want to call it, it can be. The more I can rely on room mics, and I think the tempo of the songs plays and how technical they are is a part of that decision for me. Like with a like really heavy like halftime parts and open chords and a lot of space in between the hits, and like where the room can really shine and all of that. I think everyone together in the room can sound really awesome. But if you're talking like technical death metal, it's gonna be a mess. To have some two extremes here, like the tempo of the song, the whole vibe, and also like how good the players are.
Yeah, that is my main consideration. That was my cop-out answer was the players.
Yeah.
Like if you think that you would need any editing at all, I would err on the side of isolation as much as possible. That is your new priority to me. Also, just end product. Is this going to be advertised as a live album, or are you doing a live album that you want to be perceived as a studio record? If you are expecting a studio result, isolation again.
Exactly. Yeah. Most of the time. Yeah. I think especially in DIY situations, because that gets really advanced. Like recording live, but making it sound like a proper studio record is one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah. It's for me, it's always been a commercial studio space with session musicians. That's like the only time the room has really come to life like magic for me.
Yeah. And even then, sometimes people are in different rooms or booths or whatever.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, still. All right.
Cool.
Lots of mindset stuff there. Lots of good tricks as well. Again, you can use that stuff live. Isolation stuff is helpful. Volume is going to make a difference to how you sound live. Again, that like going back to the cranking the power amp thing. Your amp doesn't need to be that loud, man.
Yep, exactly. Your amp doesn't need to be that loud. And also what you said, those are the two takeaways here for me, that do whatever it takes to make the live thing sound good, even if you think that you're sacrificing something. And the other thing is what you said, Malcolm, that don't expect a record to sound more lively or organic or better or whatever or vibey just because you recorded live.
Yeah.
So maybe recording live isn't even the right thing to do to begin with. So I just want to leave you with that.
Yeah. This reminded me, I haven't played live in so long now that I'm forgetting things, but when we had a sound guy that gigged with us a lot, and it was having a sound guy that knows your set, that does sound for you multiple times, that's the best. It's such an advantage. But he would always get us to level our guitars off. So he's, at front of house and he's like, okay, both play. And he doesn't even have it coming out on the main. So then he's like, all right, you turn up, you turn down, and get us leveled. Like, good sound starts on the sound stage. And then he reinforces it with the loudspeakers kind of thing.
100% agreed.
It's balanced coming off the stage. That's the goal.
100% agreed. I always did that when I was mixing live, when I was still mixing live. I got yelled at by a couple of guitarists for doing that because they don't want to turn down their guitars. But like I just did it anyways because it's just so worth it. And yeah. And so if you ever play live again, if we ever get to play live again, and you have a sound guy that you trust, just trust them and do what they say. Sometimes you might think you're not loud enough, but trust them.
Yep.
All right. Let's wrap it up. Thank you for listening. As always, comment, leave a review, send us an email, post in the Facebook community. Let us know if you found this episode helpful. And also feel free to share your own tricks or your thoughts on it, on that whole process. We got a couple of discussions on that topic going already in the Facebook community. But if you have a different perspective or some insights to share, just do it. Feel free to post. And let's discuss a bit further.
Hell yeah. All right. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Bye.